The interesting thing about Abu Hanifa's teachers is they were diverse, but also where Imam Abu Hanifa read and the sources and the people that he listened to were also very diverse. So not only were his teachers diverse, but he lived in a world, like I said, in Kufa, which was very, very diverse. Um, and Imam Abu Hanifa spent a lot of time with the fuqaha as well. Um, he learned their methods. He was very careful about who he chose, but he also traveled to the Haram many, many times. Um, and he met many mashayikh, many teachers there as well. And as you know, Haram, Mecca, and Medina, and Hijaz at the time, and after him as well, until the modern era, was a melting pot. It was a marja. It was a gathering place of many, many scholars, especially during the Hajj days. People would meet one another, they would benefit from one another. People might spend some time there, share knowledge, take asanid from one another, take ijazah from one another. And so there's lots of literature that's coming out in English, but also in Arabic. There's much available about the madrasas and institutions of learning and the Sufi khankas and the zawiyas that were all in the blessed cities in the Haramain. Now, I just want to mention one or two things. Imam Abu Hanifa's teachers, which we can go into in detail maybe in a future lesson, they were from different persuasions. And that's what made Imam Abu Hanifa such a broad-minded scholar. Um, we even have mentioned that he learned from scholars outside of Sunnism as well. Um, and he studied from many, many people. Okay. He studied with the Tabi'een and who had learned from Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And of course in Iraq there were many Shia sects with all the differences that the Shias have amongst themselves. You had the Kaysanis or Kaysanites, you had the Zaydis, the 12 Imams, Ismailis. And so he was listening, observing, reading their texts as well. So even if he didn't follow them, um, he obviously, we know that he had a lot of love for the house of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, so he took in everything that was around him, but he maintained his positions. And this is something that's, you see this about great minds, that they're open to learning about things. And it comes to a simple point that just because you read about someone or some ideology or some movement doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with them. You're just learning about them. In our world of cancel culture, which Muslims are not only, Muslims are part of that cancel culture in many ways. When someone reads something that other people don't like, they immediately impute something on their character. But people read all sorts of things, and their motivations can be from anything to a sympathetic understanding or to understand what the opposite party or the other party has to say. So you have to read their arguments, you have to read what they say. Only then you can really respond to them in an intellectually honest way, right? But that's obviously a problem today in our culture where, if I was to tweet something that I was reading that people didn't agree with, they would immediately try and cancel me, say, oh, Haroon's reading this. Doesn't mean I agree with it. Just like if I sit with someone that's of a different persuasion, doesn't mean I agree with them. I might be having a conversation. It might be enriching my insights by sitting with them. But because we live in a culture where Islam is on the back foot, we don't think in civilizational terms, we don't have the intellectual confidence that we should have, we become very, very threatened. So anyway, Imam Abu Hanifa was one of these people. And he studied from many, many tabi'een. There's also a view that he met some companions, but did not relate from them. So these are things that you can read about in some of the sources that I can provide to you at the end. He also had private study. So as you know, ulama didn't study in formal institutions, but they also studied privately, something that I'm a big fan of, i.e., once you've learned a certain amount, sit with the sheikh, go to his house, get a group of brothers together, sisters together, and study with the sheikh. Sheikh, we heard that you teach this book or you've learned this book, can you teach us something on it? So Imam Abu Hanifa was like this as well, and he studied with many, many people um, privately as well. He went to Hajj many times as well. And he learned from many, many ulama. He met, for example, Attar ibn Rabah, and he asked him, who are you? And he said, I'm one of the people of Kufa. So he said, from the people of a city who have divided their deen into parties. He said to him, yes. Imam Abu Hanifa replied. Atta said, from which one are you? He said, Imam Abu Hanifa said, I'm from those who do not curse the Salaf or hold Qadariya views, and do not consider a person unbeliever on account of a wrong action. So this is some sects that said if someone engages in a major sin, they immediately leave Islam. And of course, this might seem like a very benign statement, but it has huge mortal political consequences, because your life becomes up for grabs. So this is why extremism is very, very dangerous when people have bad theology. Atta ibn Abi Rabah, Allah be pleased with him, said that you're correct, so you can stay with us in Mecca. He went to Malik and discussed fiqh with him. He met Imam Awza'i and discussed with him despite their differences. So Imam Abu Hanifa met with people, he traveled quite a lot, and he debated. So I tell my friends, you should travel as much as you can. Stop going to Dubai and start going to sit with the ulama, go to study circles, go to places, halaqat where knowledge is being disseminated. Doesn't stop you from having some time in the evening, but go travel with the intention of learning ilm, rihla, going out, literally. And many of you live in places where ulama don't live too far from you, scholars don't live too far from you. And so Imam Hanifa, he grew up. He also traveled to Basra, for example, and he debated with many sects there as well. At least 20 plus. So he learned a lot by debating with people. As you know, if you're a good debater, you learn quite a lot. And so he debated with the atheists, the Dahri sect, which they believe in materialism, material atheists, and he proved to them how Allah exists and so forth as well. And you find this very early on in Imam Abu Hanifa. So this was all of the world that he lived in, the culture that he lived in. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Yeah, so he cared deeply about his students. You'll find this, inshallah, next few lessons. When you read about Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, Shaybani, many others, they loved him quite deeply. Yeah, inshallah, Raza, we will come to your question, inshallah ta'ala. So, I because of my background, I studied Islamic studies, but I also work as an academic. I read history, I read philosophy. So I kind of really muse upon the readings that I do in history. I don't give you straight, raw nuggets of knowledge. I try and situate reading and try and be fair. Because one of the things about reading history or reading anything is that you have to be fair. And this is the Hanafi way. The Hanafi way is to be deeply endowed, deeply affiliated with the idea that you must be honest in your search for the truth, and you should learn from anywhere and everywhere, and you should always be confident in your faith. Let's go to this slide. Oh, yeah, there's some debate about his age, when he died, and so forth, which I'm gonna just, if I may, I might just pass through, because we're running out of time, and it's quite a scholarly debate. So, but just to know that there is some debate amongst ulama at what age he passed away, and Allah be pleased with him. There's also a interesting debate, because I mentioned already that some people impugned upon him this idea that he gives more preference to reasoning than the Sunnah. And if you remember, I've only had, I think, maybe one lesson or 1.5 lessons with you. If you remember my lesson, and I strongly recommend that you watch that, where we talked about the Hanafi way of approaching knowledge and how to worship Allah. You'll see that actually it's not this question that I put here, the Sunnah and or the opinion. It's not the or is a red herring, because it's not a Sunnah or the opinion. It's not a Sunnah or reason. The Hanafis use the Sunnah and reason because it makes sense. God would not make you do something just for the fun of it, for no reason. Na'udhu billahi min zalik. The Hanafis are really part of this enterprise of revelation makes sense. God has told us to do things, and there's wisdom behind it. There's reasons behind why we do it. And Sunnah is an embodiment of that. Sunnah is reason based. And you find in books where the ulama show through hadith, through Quran, where Allah tells you the reason for something, where the Prophet ﷺ tells you reason why you do something. Sometimes it's not explicit, but by deep reading, by thinking about things, you can come to an idea. But also, if you know the reason for something, then it allows you to extend the law to new scenarios. And if you remember, I think I gave you the example of the catheter tube. You won't find that in the books of hadith, but what you will find is the way to think about that in the Quran and Sunnah and Usul. So I just wanted to mention that because it's a red herring when people say, "Oh, the Ahlul Bayt." They were deeply engaged in trying to understand the Sunnah and give an architecture from which they could then approach the prophetic traditions. And I think this is an adab, this is a respect that the Hanafis had with respect to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam as well. So Imam Abu Hanifa was deeply invested in this as well. I'm just going to move on a little bit more. Yeah, so I don't want to go into this different sects. I just want to share this with you, and this is how this is something that I've written. It's going to be published, I hope, if it all goes well, as part of a Oxford University Press collection, and this is taken from my chapter in there on Shah Waliullah Dehlawi, who you know already, and this is from his Hujjatullah al-Baligha, this book here. But he has another book called Al-Insaf, it's part of a longer title, and he explains why differences came about. Why did differences come about? What were the causes for them? And why did different Sahaba have different views? And so I've kind of tried to summarize it here based on my reading of Shah Waliullah Dehlawi. So in Al-Insaf, Imam Shah Waliullah Dehlawi explained how the early Muslims learned their faith dialectically from the Prophet, and differences only began to occur when the companions moved to diverse places. And they responded to situations as they arose and according to what they had learned. In the absence of textual evidence, they resorted to inference, istinbat we call it, and then ijtihad, which naturally required one to establish the illah for the ruling. What's the reason for the ruling, right? That's what they did. It happened naturally. Shah will expounded 7 reasons for differences that arose amongst the Sahaba and the early community. One group of companions may have heard a ruling, but not another, and the latter then resorted to ijtihad. Right? That makes sense. Some of them interpreted prophetic actions as a means of drawing closer to God, while others evaluated it as a mere permissibility. Another reason is due to misconstruing. So there were examples where people didn't quite understand exactly what was the import. Sometimes a simple error of forgetting. Sometimes there was a disagreement on what was the reason. You'll find this. And there were also debates on how to reconcile what's called jama' between 2 conflicting rules. If you had 2 hadiths that seem to be saying conflicting things, what is the method? How do you make sense of that? Eventually, regional followers emerged across the Muslim world, with each having their imams and developing specific methods in drawing legal conclusions. Shah Waliullah then discussed the causes of legal disagreements among Jurists. In the end, this was Shah Waliullah, by the way. For him, it was Shafi'i who, after inspecting 2 schools, the Hanafis in Iraq and the Malik in Medina, and being dissatisfied with them, founded his own school. This is Shah Waliullah's interpretation. Among his concerns was that certain sound hadith were not found among the followers until Shafi'i's time. So anyway, Imam Shah Waliullah obviously has his own stuff. But what I'm saying is that differences were occurring naturally early on in the Muslim community. And Imam Abu Hanifa places a great emphasis, and Hanafi Mazhab does, on the practice not only of the Prophet ﷺ, but also on the Sahaba and the early generations. So one usuli of the Hanafi Mazhab defines the Sunnah, not how we define it as, a book of hadith, but much more broader. At-tariqatu al-maslukatu fi ad-din, a well-trodden path. Like, what were the Sahaba doing? What were the Tabi'in doing? How did they understand this? Because they saw revelation. They saw it being sent upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so the companions in the Hanafi madhab have a special place, and especially those who were blessed with deep insight into religion. For example, Umar, may Allah be pleased with him. So I just wanted to mention this. Yeah, so let's move on to this in the interest of time. I mean, I have a list of the different sects that Imam Abu Hanifa had to engage with. You can read that in your own time if you so decide. Imam Abu Hanifa also, and I just want to conclude in the interest of time, he had to engage with politics, the Umayyads and Abbasids, but he also had to deal with theological problems. The Mu'tazilites in particular, and you can read that in your own time if you so wish to, because it gets really entangled if we get into it right now. But Imam Abu Hanifa engaged with them. So I've touched upon his political views. He also had some views on Kalam, which were passed on to us by his students and people that followed him. There's debates about whether he authored these books and so forth and so on. But he was a great theologian in his own right also as well. And so he has debates and views on Iman, faith. Faith is both an affirmation and confirmation. You have to believe in your heart and you have to verbalize it. And the second part of verbalizing is also political, because you become part of the Muslim polity. You have rights and hukuk. So he had views on things like that. He also had some interesting intakes on qadr and a man's actions. He was very, very muhtat. He was very careful, circumspect about his views on those situations. There were some conversations around the createdness of the Quran, which is a theological debate. It's part of our theology now. And he also has some very, very interesting insights into ethics, akhlaq, and society, and how things should be done, and ideas that were passed on to us because of that, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But Imam Abu Hanifa has some advice for all of us, I guess. He was a man of exemplary character who displayed virtue, and this was natural to him. We have books are pregnant with examples of his exemplary conduct. He cared deeply about people, society, and people's reformation, and he wanted to bring out what was best for people. He cared deeply for people, and he had a very unique way of teaching, passing on knowledge as well, in a way that the student can learn. I hope I can do that in my own life, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, inshallah ta'ala. Let me just make sure so let's kind of just really, summarize his students, which we will talk about. So Imam Abu Yusuf will be someone that we need to cover. Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, very interesting lives that they had as well. So we will talk about them too. In particular, there's also Imam Zufar ibn Hudayl, I don't know if that's on the list, but maybe we can talk about him later on. I just want to make sure we've covered everything. Yeah, so some people have asked for further resources, and I think this is a good time to stop because Maghrib is coming up very soon. There are a number of resources that you can read. In Arabic, there's plenty, and there's a lot more coming out. But I think these three books are good. The one on the left is the one on your left by Sheikh Muhammad Akram Nadwi is a nice, simple read. If you just want something to read while you're drinking a cup of coffee, then you can read that. The one in the middle is a recent publication. It's very academic, but it's a brilliant understanding of how Imam Abu Hanifa was received by Muslims over the centuries. Okay, from the 8th to the 11th century. So, a brilliant book if you want to get into something more meaty. And the final one here, and by the way, this is not exclusive, so there are other books that you can read. These are just the ones that I'm aware of that I think you can read. It's quite easy, this one's quite short. And this is a translation by Abu Zahra, of Abu Zahra's book, and Imam Abu Hanifa. And this is a very casual read as well. You can get the main bits that you would like to read about Imam Abu Hanifa in there. I just want to say once again, thank you to you all for coming on a Sunday evening or afternoon and listening to what I hope will be something that's useful for you to then take away with you bi'iznillahi ta'ala. So we'll stop there. Um, and I ask Allah to bless us all and allow us all to follow in the way of the ulama and the mashayikh. سبحان الله بحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك